All right, welcome again to those that are joining from the past couple of sessions. And if this is your first one that you're joining from this series, thanks for chiming in. Started the recording, maybe just wait one more minute as we have some folks trickling in. We'll get started. All right, 12:01, there's the starting bell. So let's kick things off. Again, great to see everyone that's joining. Quick reminder, please use the Q&A if you have any questions as we're going through. I'll be monitoring that as best as I can as I'm walking through the presentations live. We also have Julia today from Databricks that'll be helping to answer any questions that you have. So please take advantage of that. For just general messages, post in the chat, but for questions, use the Q&A. So today is the third part of our three-part series covering all things related to Databricks being used for analytics. We've already covered SQL and dashboards. We have recordings available. I've uploaded them to YouTube in case you want to rewatch them. So please reach out if you are interested in getting those. But today is all focused on Genie. And candidly, this is my favorite topic, probably of anything to talk about with Databricks, because it's talking about a lot of new functionality and enabling more people to be data driven, data conscious, data aware, being able to be capable of using data without being a super technical person. Genie helps to solve a lot of those challenges. And this is a space, this natural language analytics or natural language querying has been around now for quite a long time, maybe 8 or 9 years. But as soon as I came to Databricks, I was really amazed at how fast we were able to build such a functional and industry-leading solution for Genie. So happy to showcase that today. As usual, follow the same flow, kind of do some intros on the functionality and slides, go into a demo. You're going to see an end-to-end example of how to build a Genie space. I'll highlight best practices as we go, talk about the important things to keep in mind when you are building a Genie space, talk about integrations, how you can use that, and things like that. So we'll dive in. I'll try to wrap up the slides in 15 minutes, but candidly, as much as I love this topic, I think that it might take a few more minutes and be worth spending a few more minutes in slides to make sure everyone's aware and has the right expectation and understanding of the problems that Genie solves, as well as the ones that it doesn't. So I'm going to reuse a couple of slides from last time as a transition here, right? Everyone on the call today, in some way, shape, or form, I imagine, uses data or enables other people to use data to accomplish their jobs today. Everybody wants that. They want to be data driven, make decisions that are kind of sound and grounded in whatever data your business is capturing to help drive strategic initiatives going forward. We talked about dashboards last time. It's a much more, I think, familiar setting for anybody that's ever worked with data visualizations, dashboards, reporting. These are all very common things. And no matter what we talk about today, dashboards are not going away. They serve a very important function. They're really great for giving the state of the business, providing executive reports, giving you that quick landing point to go to for the key KPIs that you're responsible for managing or growing or influencing. They're never going to go away. However, there's a challenge with dashboards today, and this is really where this entire concept of natural language analytics came about. A dashboard is something that has to go through a design process. You have to understand what data do we have available, what metrics do I want to showcase, how do I want to visualize that, what chart types, what display methods do I want to use, how do I want to format and customize the look and feel of my report. All these different things are all a part of that design process. Another part of that is what questions are we actually answering for the business? What are we actually helping them to solve for that maybe they don't have an easy way of doing that today? So a dashboard is somewhat restricted in the sense that it can't answer every one of these questions. It's designed to answer a specific set of questions that are shown here. But the second that you have users asking questions that go beyond the scope of that dashboard, that leads to a number of different things. Either new dashboards get scoped and created, data teams get messages, emails, pings, saying this is an urgent request. Can you pull this analysis for me, or send me the data from this source, and I'll pull it into Excel, do something like that, right? So while dashboards are great, it doesn't offer a holistic solution for that, right? Nobody wants to have 100 dashboards that they have to just search which one is going to actually answer their question. The intent behind what people want to enable for the business is a self-service mechanism by which people can truly talk and interact with their data. And that's exactly where we come in with Genie here. So Genie is designed to be that conversational analytical tool that you can truly talk and converse with in a natural language. One of the biggest things that you're going to see if you've already tried Genie, or what you'll see in the demo today, if this is your first time, is that Genie truly is a natural language system where you don't need to ask things in a structured and rigorous format. The challenge for a long time with a lot of these tools, maybe before the LLM hype wave came about maybe 2.5 years ago, every one of the tools out there that did natural language analytics relied on a structure by which you ask your questions. And it was then limiting the number of questions that you could ask. With Genie, now that we're incorporating more complex and compound AI systems into the solution, we're able to diagnose and parse through questions no matter how you ask them. So you're not, when you get exposed to Genie, there's really not a huge learning curve in terms of what questions you can ask or how to ask them. The intent is to make it as natural an experience as possible. In the last two sessions, we talked a little bit about Unity Catalog and how that integrates with our SQL queries, our dashboards, how we can govern our data in Unity Catalog and make that easily searched and explored. Well, the same benefits apply here for Genie. It's an integrated part of the Databricks platform. So all the governance rules that you apply on your data apply automatically when you provide access to a Genie space for an end user. Their exact same data permissions will hold true. Nothing is changing. There's no separate governance mechanism. It's all controlled by Unity Catalog. So it's very easily integrated with the rest of the platform without you having to do anything on your own. And while I'm going to showcase, a few different ways by which you can consume Genie, keep in mind that Genie is now available either through the Databricks interface that we offer natively or via an API. So if you have a custom application, a custom dashboard that you're using from some other provider today, as long as they have the ability to read and process API requests from that system, you can use Genie via the API. So it makes it really great for meeting the end users where they are and not forcing a different consumption mechanism on them than they might already be used to. As much as possible, we're trying to make it easy for companies to eliminate the concept of change management, having to go through, a migration of one tool to another. You can certainly use Databricks, but you can certainly also use what you're using today via the API. So what is Genie under the hood, right? The simplest way to think about it is that it is a combination of large language models and specialized agents that accomplish the task of converting a question that you ask in natural language to a SQL query that then runs that query. So the agent component is what's doing that text to SQL translation. We're taking your question that was asked in natural language that might be something like, show me the on-time delivery rate for suppliers in Japan in the last month. That's going to be a question that's converted into SQL based on the elements in your question. It'll apply metrics, filters, join different data sets together. All those things are going to happen automatically. Genie will generate the query and then run it for you automatically. So it's kind of automating that entire process. The way that Genie creates that SQL query is through all the different components that you see here on the page. Unity Catalog metadata, if you're using metric views, a new feature in Databricks, query history about how people are consuming data from these tables already today. We have a local knowledge store that allows you to add things like custom queries or examples that define metrics that are not available elsewhere. Define business rules and logic that are not available directly in the data. And you'll see some examples of that here in a minute. So the intent is that as your data changes, as the needs of end users change, Genie will continuously update based on new data values that come in, new patterns and behaviors on how people query that data. But it also provides the ability for you as a user to be that human in the loop, allow some level of intervention or context injection to make sure that the Genie space is providing the right answers to the end users. So while we can read through a lot of those things, it is definitely important to understand Genie is a fantastic solution today. I truly believe it is the best thing available on the market in this space. However, I want to also clarify that Genie is tailored for your data. Genie is not ChatGPT. If you're familiar with Databricks or have been around it for the last maybe year or two, you've probably heard the term the data intelligence platform. And that is, I'd say, nowhere more real than it is with Genie. Genie is learning from your data, but it is not a general intelligence engine. It is not ChatGPT. It relies on you having good quality data, good quality context through things like metadata, and a good understanding of what your end users need in order to make Genie as a viable and problem-solving solution. It is really great at doing some of those things like connecting to a table, doing base aggregations, but in order to make it a solution for an actual business problem, it relies on you as an analyst or you working with some of the folks who own data within your organization to help bridge that gap between your data, the questions, and kind of filling in the middle with all the context relevant for what any system would know. Any of these compound AI systems, they are designed in a way that is intended to mirror and mimic that of a human. So think about Genie as something that out of the box can look at your data. It can do it faster, more efficiently than a human can, but it still relies on that context bridge. And that's a really important part about making Genie successful within any project. So one thing you'll also see me highlight in a bit is that Genie is now something that you can directly integrate with dashboards. So if you already have a dashboard today in AI BI dashboard, there's now an option you can add a little toggle in the dashboard to ask Genie questions in natural language. So that also helps to kind of consume the output of what Genie offers. Instead of going to build the next dashboard, you can directly integrate that with Genie today. So I want to skip ahead real quick to talk about the consumption layer, some best practices, and then we'll dive into a demo. So if any of you've been here for the, I'd say the first session, but maybe the last two sessions, you've seen Databricks and what the experience has looked like for a long time. Frankly, Databricks does have a lot of features. There's a lot of things that you can do in the platform, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And so when we talk about Genie, we're often talking about servicing non-technical users or business users, having them come to Databricks and seeing all these different options, data engineering, machine learning, et cetera. It's a little bit complex. And so Databricks is helping to solve for that challenge of how can we make it easier for you to consume Genie without having to go to the Databricks platform in the way that it looks today. One thing that we're offering now in a private preview is something called Databricks One. If you've been in tune with Databricks back from our Data and AI Summit in June, we announced this. It's basically an interface giving the user access to Databricks, but giving them read-only access in a simplified UI. So if you have users that you don't need to be worrying about data engineering, ML development, running notebooks, if all they want to do is consume data from a dashboard, a Genie space, or an app, you can provide them access as a consumer in Databricks. That's the name of the entitlement, and that will give them the look and feel of what you see here. Far simpler view, far more focused on things that are relevant for those users, right? So we'll talk about that. On top of that, I already mentioned this, you can integrate the API through Genie with other systems, whether it's a custom application, whether you want to integrate with Teams, with Slack. I'd expect these integrations and kind of patterns to grow and develop over time. We already have some documentation around these things today, so do look out for those as well. So that's kind of the background on what Genie is and how to consume it. I now want to talk about really what is the most important part. And this aligns with how we've built the product. For the longest time, our product teams were so focused on just one thing. And it may have delayed timelines in rolling out certain features, but any of these natural language solutions, the intent should always be getting the right answer. And that's what our product teams have been focused on is how do we make Genie as accurate as possible, right? Worrying about API support and custom integrations with other technology is a secondary element because if Genie can't be accurate enough, those integrations don't actually matter, right? So our teams have spent so much time putting together the best compound AI system for getting natural language to SQL conversion. If you've heard of the BERT benchmark, Databricks just launched our benchmark on that a couple of weeks ago and came out on the top of the leaderboard, right? So we've done a great job at demonstrating that Genie is ready to go, viable in the market, does a great job at doing that, right? But the part for anybody on the call here that's really important is there's still things that you have to do to help Genie be applicable for your data, for your business, right? Again, that context bridge is where the content of today comes in. All the other stuff, integrations, consumption down the line, not as important if you can't get this part right. So this is basically what happens when Genie gets asked a question. It looks for context in the forms of the metadata, the example SQL queries that you've provided, any instructions for custom business logic that's not in the data. If it finds a match and can generate a query with enough confidence, it will generate that query and automatically run the query, right? If it can't find a match, if it can't generate a result enough, it will look and prune the columns, basically just filter out any additional context, generate the SQL. If it's still not confident that it can actually answer the question correctly, it'll prompt back to the user and say, I don't have enough information to answer this. Can you help me out? Or what does this term mean? What can I relate that to in your data? So it's not like ChatGPT and where it's going to give you an answer no matter what. It's not general intelligence, it's data intelligence. It's a system built to work on your data. So everything Genie can do is a read-only query, and it's only going to generate that query if it has the right context on your data. So the recommendations that we always have to get started with Genie, start with well-documented and well-understood tables. Keep the scope small in the sense that what is in your Genie space should be topic specific. Don't recommend including data from baseball and football in the same Genie space. Those are two different sports. You might have many different tables that combine different statistics and metrics. As much as possible, try to keep your Genie spaces well scoped to a department scope of work. So in this case, we're going to talk through the example of supply chain data again. We have some information of sales, but that's more just for demonstrative purposes. You may need to work on keeping the topics focused and narrow enough to make sure that Genie doesn't get too confused. If you add too much context, it makes it hard to get more granular and detailed with your questions, right? So keep your initial starting point with Genie well scoped, start small, use tables that are understood and well defined. And that includes having things like table descriptions, column descriptions in Genie or in Unity Catalog. If you can't or don't have access to make those changes in Unity Catalog to add metadata to your fields, we also now support this in the Genie space directly. You'll see all this in a bit. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip on just a tiny bit more. Beyond metadata, things like column descriptions, column names, things like that, you can also provide example SQL queries and instructions in natural language to define how these queries should be generated by Genie before they're run. So again, these are things that are assets at your disposal to help bridge that context gap. So I'm going to talk about that one live. Going to skip through again just for the sake of time. We talked about a little bit how Genie is already integrated with everything within Unity Catalog. So there's no difference in permissions and how you grant users access to data. All of that still exists. Genie respects all of those permissions automatically. So really all you have to do is give users access to the Genie space itself, and then whatever the underlying SQL compute warehouse is that you're using. You'll see all those as we create the space in a second. The last thing I want to highlight is that with any one of these different systems, getting one of these projects or products into production relies on you having confidence that the solution does its job well. The way by which we recommend you evaluate that is to use the benchmarking system and tooling in Databricks. Benchmarking allows you to evaluate any number of questions that you want to. Did Genie get this question correctly? It's not the exact same thing as context, but it's an evaluation mechanism. So when you want to say, I'm confident that Genie can answer 90% of these questions with high accuracy, that gives me confidence to roll this out to my end users. We recommend using the benchmarks feature to do that. You'll see how to do that here as well. I'm going to touch on the best practices as we go. I'm going to highlight then and flip over really quickly. We do also have a documentation page. I will share this in the chat. Highly recommend using this for a kind of a grounding point in the event that you want to get more information about this after the fact, right? I just sent the link in the chat to our best practices guide that talks about a lot of the things that you'll see me talk about here today. So I went 5 minutes over, 6 minutes over. Let's get started and actually kind of walk through some experiences and see what that's going to look like. So I'm going to work backwards for a second, just kind of highlight the experience. You saw a couple of quick things in snippets and slides, but let's just walk through an example of what a finished and complete Genie room looks like and talk about how we can ask questions. You can see what the experience looks like. So I'm going to start off with looking at my supply chain data. I have information about inventory, warranty claims, sales data, all this in the context of how do we get our parts available in the right location to build the right products. How can we meet demand with sales increases in forecast to match that back to our supply chain, right? So these are the types of things we're going to be asking, just like the same context in the last 2 sessions. So let's just start asking some questions on top of this data. I want to know, what is the total cost incurred from defects for Veloce Motors? So Veloce Motors is one of our suppliers. I want to see how many warranty claims have been submitted and what the total cost of those is for all of the defects submitted for that supplier specifically. So I'm asking that question. Genie then comes back and automatically provides for me the answer as well as an explanation. It provides me the answer to say, this is what you're looking for. Here are the data sources that I'm going to answer that question with. So the data sources it's pulling from are the auto warranty claims table, the supply chain network table, and it also then provides me the ability to see the code. Again, not relevant for a consumer, but helpful for you as somebody as an analyst that might be responsible for building these spaces. You can see the code, validate it at any point in time, provides that transparency to you to make sure that you're getting the right responses, right? Let's ask a different question. I want to see, show me the model level revenue. So we have, a bunch of different vehicles that we make. I want to look at revenue by model level revenue, right? This is going to then generate a query. And when possible, Genie will provide a visualization automatically to show me, what is the revenue breakdown by model type. If I want to break this down, say, by month, I can do that. And this is another big thing with Genie is that we have context retention between your questions. So I want to just ask Genie to break that down monthly. I didn't have to repeat the same questions and parameters and inputs as the previous question. It retains that context to know I want to look at revenue by model, now just adding that dimension by month. And you can see now that the visualization is going to change based on the inputs that I provided. So Genie is going to provide the answer whenever it can find one. This is the general flow of what we're offering. The important things to keep in mind are that this doesn't just happen automatically. Things like revenue often are going to have custom defined business logic. So you can go in and see here, I have auto sales and auto vehicle master that show me the number of vehicles sold, the quantity, but there might be other things that go into that equation, like front-end discounts that you have to take into account. So there might be other tables in your data set that you have to loop into your data model. Other things like the model. Let's say I just had an identifier in my database table for like MDL or some other acronym that references what the model looks like. You might have to provide that description for Genie to understand exactly what columns you're referencing. So this is a very simple walkthrough. We'll do more of that as we go, but this is the experience that you can expect with Genie when you're using the UI in Databricks. Ask a question, get an answer. Now, again, Genie is not ChatGPT. So if I ask the question, I'm a big Packers fan. So if I asked how many touchdowns did Josh Jacobs score last year, um, Genie doesn't have the answer, right? It's not going to just be able to search the internet. The context that Genie has is relevant to your data. So it says this question is irrelevant to the data that was provided. Please ask a question related to what I can find. So Genie has a lot of guardrails built into place to make sure the queries, the questions defined prevent hallucinations and only provide answers based on your data, right? Hopefully giving you, again, confidence in rolling this out to end users and get into production. Okay. So this is the most basic example of what the flow looks like. Let's dive in and actually see how do we get a space to look like this and actually be able to answer these questions reliably. And that all starts at the very beginning with the data in Unity Catalog. So as much as possible, I always recommend start using tables or data assets. That can be a materialized view, a view. Use an asset for your Genie spaces that's well understood, may already be leveraged today for reporting and dashboarding solutions, because you're going to have common queries or common, I guess, dashboards that might be generated on top of that data already. It's likely pretty well understood what the user questions are. So it's going to be easy for you to understand how the data model relates, what context is missing from this that an end user might need supplemented through something like a more detailed column name or a more detailed column comment, right? So Unity Catalog offers all of these different things at a table and a column level to provide that detail, as well as specify things in your data model. So you can provide things like a primary key that helps you determine the relationships between these tables and other tables. So the table level descriptions, column descriptions, primary key, foreign key relationships, column names as they appear in the table, all of these are examples of context that you're using in the Genie space. So if you don't apply these things, all that you're effectively able to do with, so let's just maybe simplify that for a second. If you take any table or any data extract in a CSV file, if all that you want to do is do a sum, account, min, max, standard percentage type of aggregation on an already existing column, and you want to refer to it by the column name, sure, Genie can do that out of the box, no problem. It's really great at that. In fact, it was, again, on the Bird benchmark, recently shown as a leader in that category, being able to convert things from a question to a SQL query in an efficient fashion, provide the right aggregations, things like that. But for your data, for your business, your needs are almost always going to go far beyond that. You're going to need to apply more advanced filters, apply custom vernacular for your business, use acronyms and phrasing that doesn't exist in the raw data itself. So comments and metadata are a way by which you can fill that gap and make Genie more content aware of what's actually happening in your data, right? So as much as possible, that's the place I recommend starting. In Unity Catalog, add these comments here when you have the access to do so, or work with your data partners to do so. The reason why I recommend that over doing this in the Genie space, which I'll show in a minute, is when you add a comment here, that instantly makes your data searchable within Databricks. So any user can come in here and say, I'm looking for BOM data. Genie will, or Databricks now, will find the content from a user's question and match that back to different data assets, show you all the different tables that have to do with BOM data. It's also a semantic search, meaning it's not going to look at just the names of the columns. It's also looking at table names, descriptions, highlighting matches in there. So when you add more descriptions to your data assets in Unity Catalog, they're searchable and discoverable through anybody in the UC interface. They're available to the Databricks assistant to help out with better generation of code, troubleshooting of code through a developer lens, and accessible by Genie out of the box, right? So it solves a lot more problems up front. However, you can do some of those things like apply column descriptions in Genie itself. So I recommend starting Unity Catalog if you have access to do so. If not, let's go through and walk through an example how to do that in Genie itself. So to create a Genie space really couldn't be easier. Click New on the upper right side of the screen, select the tables that you want to use. In this case, I'm going to pull in all of the auto tables that I have in my personal schema. So auto, bill of materials, warranty claims, sales forecasts, all those things, right? These are all the different tables that I'm going to be loading into Genie. Once I create the space, it just connects Genie to all those tables. So now this is the layout that you would see as a developer of the Genie space. What are some of the things that happen automatically by Databricks? I ingested those data tables. On the left-hand side, you can kind of see this like interface to help out with testing chats, starting new conversations and questions. Genie already generated some example questions that it can answer based on the data. So the better your content and metadata is in UC, the better these example questions will be more out of the box. You can also just explain the data set where Genie will identify the list of tables, the type of content and questions they can answer, the relationships and data model between them. All those things are provided as a description to the end user out of the box. And a user at any point could ask this same question. Describe the tables in the space for me so I know what questions I can ask and answer. Other things that happen automatically. When I load all these data tables, Databricks is going to automatically add something called example values. Example values are going to populate Genie's knowledge store internally to say, these are values that appear in this data. It's kind of like running a select column in SQL, but it's pulling a sample of those values. That helps out with matching and semantically matching or fuzzy matching the values that a user asks in a question back to the actual values in your data. So for example, if you had a supplier name, you can see some example values here like TurboStar Inc., Veloci Motors, Pit Stop Performance. If somebody asked the question, show me all the parts that we source from TurboStar, it'll know that it's referencing that exact value and be faster at retrieving it rather than having to search across every single column to find a matching value, right? So the example values help out with the accuracy and the performance at which Genie can perform its query generation for you. The other thing it provides are things like value dictionaries. So if you need to map values in an attribute to a more, I'll call it business-friendly name. If you want to map something like your data shows United States, you want the value to be searchable through US, right? You can add these value dictionaries along with doing things like adding column descriptions, synonyms, and aliases. So this is a great place if you don't have access to do the things in Unity Catalog, you can add those descriptions here. Always recommend turning on example values and the value dictionaries by default because it improves the accuracy, right? So imagine in this case, supplier name was what I'm referring to as the actual column name in my data, but maybe a synonym that I want to look at this is as a provider of parts. I don't know, other examples, right? You can hopefully see some scenarios where that would apply for your data, where the actual way someone refers to that data attribute isn't the name of the column itself or in the description. They might need a better way to do that. You can provide that detail through synonyms, right? So that's another thing that happens out of the box is that Genie will populate those example values, hopefully make it more accurate and performant when you're asking those questions. So we have a list of all the tables that we have here. We've already added some metadata. I didn't go through the examples of all that directly in the system. And actually, I forgot one thing really quick that I forgot to highlight in Unity Catalog is the auto generation of those things. Big thing to highlight that I forgot. In Unity Catalog, as long as your Databricks account has been enabled to use what we call our Gen AI features, you'll see this option. On a data table that doesn't have a description, you can use AI to generate a description. You can do the same thing on comments. To generate a comment in bulk for all the columns in the table. So this is a really helpful way of getting started. You might need to customize these further, but it's a great way to get started generating some context for those data sets, right? So you can see here I've populated some example comments, saved them. They're now in Unity Catalog. So one quick thing I forgot to highlight. Now let's jump back to the Genie space. So we're going to still stick in that new space. So we've added our tables, we've added the metadata. Now we need to focus on how do we fill in the gap? How do we apply um, our custom metrics? How do we apply our custom business logic and domain information into Genie? And how do we bridge the gap between what Genie might see directly encoded in the data and what we need it to be able to answer and support? Let's look at an example. So show me the list of suppliers and the country they are located in. Right. So I'm just asking a question to retrieve that information. You'll see in a second that we have suppliers located around the world. Right. We have suppliers from many different countries. I might want to filter that list to just suppliers in Asia. So show me just the suppliers in Asia. And let's see what happens with Genie. Right. It's doing its best to answer some of those questions. Maybe it's pulling some content back from the comments that I've asked. But if you notice, it's missing some information. It's missing Australia and India. So this is an example where Asia is not a value directly encoded in my data. There's no easy way by which Genie is looking up that information. So it's an example of something that is not general intelligence. We're doing data intelligence on your data. Sure, there is some generality to it, but Genie doesn't have like a list of countries to refer to in its back pocket, right? That's not a part of the source of data that's provided to it. So this is an area that you might need to fill through some other mechanism. And a way that by which we can do that in Genie is to use the instructions. In the instructions, you see three options. You have a text-based instruction, a join, and a SQL query. The way that I would think about these three is text-based information is great for things that are business logic not encoded in your tables. Joins are helpful when you have a complex data model where you need to explicitly define how different tables relate to one another. You can see that Genie automatically inherited these by the primary key foreign keys in our tables. However, if you have more complex ones, you can add those directly in here, specifying the tables, the type of join, relationship type, etc. And then SQL queries is great for metrics or custom logic, things that require a more expansive query. Think about the example we've walked through the last two series in the webinar, where we're trying to evaluate what parts we have insufficient stock for based on an increased forecast in demand and sales. That relied on kind of two different subqueries to relate our forecast data, doing some simple math, but another query to generate the increase in part demand supply, or increase in part demand in our data, and then relating the information together. So that's an example of something we're going to input here as a SQL query in a minute. So we can replicate that same functionality in a Genie query itself. But text-based is a great way of doing exactly what we just saw in that question a second ago. I have a list of suppliers. I want to know which ones fall into different countries. I can apply that base knowledge in here. Maybe this is something you have stored in a separate table already, like a geographic mapping table based on a subregion region. If you have that, great. If not, I can provide that context in here. So once I save those instructions, now Genie has that context. I can ask that same question again, copy paste down here. It now has a mapping to say, these are all the countries by which we are defining as Asian-based countries. Well, hopefully my instructions saved and it fixed it live. Show me the suppliers in Asia. Let me try this one more time. Show me, let's make sure this did in fact save. Show me the suppliers in South America. Let's try that one. Okay, there we go. So South America finds Brazil. Show me suppliers in Asia. Okay, well, didn't produce the exact result I expected. Maybe an example of the potential challenges or difficulties working with Genie. It is not a deterministic system in every scenario. So the queries it generates are not, I'll say, not the same as a developer going and writing a query every single time. This is interesting, definitely, because this all worked when I showed it before. So I don't know how to exactly explain that, but worked for South America. Again, hopefully you see some examples of how that text-based information works. You can apply those instructions. Now, the instructions might also be useful for, um, you know, you can apply things in instructions like general filters. So you might do something like, restrict all user questions to data in the last 12 months, right? This is additional context that instead of relying on a user having to be responsible for what data they see, you can apply this as an instruction to Genie to say, I only want to see data in the last 12 months. No matter what a user asks, their question should still also apply those filters. So if your data has more than 12 months worth of data, it can apply this context and filter on the fly. That's a good example for it. Another one might be, I want to look up, or I want to combine different fields that exist in my data. So, when a user asks for supplier name, also include the ID, like, supplier ID concatenated with a hyphen and the supplier name, just as an example of something that you can do that it's not an actual field that exists in your data. You could certainly also write a SQL query that does the same thing, but this just now instructs Genie so that when it provides the supplier name, it should also apply the supplier ID, which would indicate and provide the better, I think, a better, more comprehensive example back to the end user to say, this is the name of the supplier. Here's the ID that they have from our acquisition system, right? So these are examples of questions that you can ask from Genie and the different additional ways by which you can apply context. So instructions are great by doing things in a natural language framework, applying and filling that gap to your domain knowledge. Maybe one other common use for this would be like acronyms. So if your users frequently refer to OTD as a metric, and maybe your metric is defined in a query as on-time delivery, OTD means on-time delivery, right? Custom acronyms, custom domain, and business vernacular are all things that are relevant for the instructions. Covered joins already. Let's jump to SQL queries. If I come in here and ask a question to Genie, show me the attainment for the Fellstrom model this year, right? Now, Genie is going to look through all the different content that it can, but it doesn't have the full answer to what attainment means exactly. What is the definition of attainment? And in this case, what I mean by attainment is I want to compare our total forecast to our actual sales to identify what our attainment was for our sales organization. So Genie is prompting me to say, I don't have enough information to generate a query. I'm not confident enough about what that means based on what's available to me right now. So this is a great example where I have a custom metric that I want to add as a SQL query. So I just copy pasted one in that I already had, but you can see what this is basically doing is comparing our total sales quantity to our forecast quantity to provide a definition for the question up here, what was attainment, right? So I have a metric defined as attainment here, comparing our sales volume to our forecast volume to look at what percent of our forecast have we actually attained. I can preview that query, make sure that it runs and operates automatically. And if you recall from the dashboarding session, this is the exact same metric that we populated back there. So you can see our overall attainment thus far against the forecast is 48%. So now I have a metric that I can define. I'll save that query, come back in here, ask the same question again. I was thinking back to the example with Asia. Sometimes you do need to start a new chat for the instructions to take hold. So if this doesn't work, I'll try that. If not, hopefully it does work. So now instead of providing the overall attainment of all vehicle types, now we're adding an additional filter to just the Fellstrom model. But the code that it generates is using that example function. You can see what was my attainment, and it's filtering now to just the Fellstrom model, right? So it's taking that metric that I just defined in a SQL query, populating that code, and the additional filter that you've provided. So don't think about a SQL query as it can only run this exact query. You can still tune it with your other filters, other prompts, things like that. Let me just try that real quick, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Let's start a new chat and just ask, show me suppliers from Asia. That might be why the text instruction didn't hold. And if that didn't work, then I'll just skip it. There we go. Okay, so it may have just been the new chat issue. There we go. So, and you can also see now that it's taken the other instruction. I asked to show me suppliers from Asia. It's now taking into account that other text instruction so that when a user asks to see the list of suppliers, it also shows them the ID on top of that, right? So just again, provides that clarity to an end user, combining two different columns together in a field. Okay. There we go. So just the new chat issue. So sometimes when you ask a question, it takes a little bit of time for those changes to propagate into an existing chat. That was the issue there. Awesome. So those are some really simple examples of what we can do. I have a couple other ones that I wanted to go into. So I added this instruction here for OTD and on-time delivery, but we don't really have a metric for that again. So if I ask the same question to Genie, show me my OTD, it doesn't have a way of defining that. OTD is not a standard column in our data. It's a custom definition where we need to look at all the total amount of parts that were delivered on time out of the total number of parts that were delivered. In our data, we have data tables that help to answer that. So we have the supplier sourced table that has information about the date requested for a particular order and the date received. Maybe my business has defined SLA to say anything delivered within 3 weeks is considered on time, right? So let's add a custom query with that logic to define our OTD. So what is OTD? Copy paste this example in here. And let's look at this query, right? So I'm now comparing the total number of parts that were sourced within a 3-week buffer by which the date or by which the order was requested and submitted, compared to just the total number of parts that were ordered. And then it's going to do the just a simple divide or percentage-based calculation times 100 to get to a normalized metric, right? You can see here I was kind of experimenting with using a parameter. We'll do that in a different example in a second. But again, always recommend testing, previewing the function. You can see that holistically across all suppliers, our on-time delivery was 71%. So let's save that that function. Go back into chat. Show me OTD. Right? We just ran the exact query, so it should have a very good sense of how to do that as long as the context is still there. It was for attainment, so I'm hoping it's there for OTD. Boom. Show me OTD for orders placed in January. Right now, adding a date filter. So just adding another parameter, another filter, again, demonstrating that an end user is not just going to ask, show me OTD, right? They're going to have relevant filters for their data, filters on the business to get to a very specific and detailed answer. And I can even break this down further to say, how about for only Asia or Asian suppliers, right? So you can see that example of I provided a definition for what that metric looks like. It allows me to now go through and flexibly answer that question, apply other filters on the fly. So all of these are the way by which you bridge the gap. That's the phrase I use every time I talk with one of my accounts here at Databricks for is your goal as developers to fill that gap between your base tables and the end user questions. It's not going to be possible to do it for 100% of cases, right? You're going to have users that come in and ask, extremely complex and specific examples, right? But that's part of the process by which you get a space ready for different end users. Hearing users ask the simple questions and asking the more advanced questions is an important part of that consumption experience. I see Julia's answered a bunch of questions, but I see one lingering here that I think is a good topic bringing up. Can Genie perform advanced analytics like having a predictive model and producing the underlying data and its attributions and relations amongst them? So yes, Genie can tap into other custom functions that can include handling a prediction of a model. You can use Databricks. We have something that we support called AI query. I think that's just the first SQL result that you get. AI query can call any function, call any model that you build. It can also use out-of-the-box models that we offer through Databricks to do different types of tasks like apply a prediction or a forecast from an existing model, do text summarization, text classification, um, things like that, right? So definitely look into the AI query as like a SQL-based function that you can impart into your space. Now, the advanced analytics component, one thing that I didn't allude to in my slide, that I plan on getting to towards the end, which we're getting close to anyway. The last slide is something called Genie Deep Research Mode. So we just walked through some base examples, right? I know I'm talking a lot, maybe, so you're not seeing like 100 of these asked at once, but you're kind of seeing the flow. The flow of Genie today is user asks a question, Genie generates a single SQL query, right? Maybe it's subqueries, but it generates one result at a time. One of the things that our product team is now working on and should be available, I think, within the next couple of weeks is what we call Genie Deep Research Mode. Think about the questions that Genie can answer today as the what questions. What happened? What did my metric look like? But the next level of question the user would go into is, wow, I saw, this on-time part percentage or on-time delivery for all the orders placed in January decline to 54%, right? You could go into a part-based analysis, a supplier-based analysis, a region-based analysis. There's a number of directions you could take that. As an end user, you might not want to have to ask every one of those things. Break this down by all those dimensions and find the ones that are most important. That's where Genie Deep Research comes in to be able to answer those questions. If I see that my on-time delivery in January was 54%, I could say, why is that? Where are the areas in my business where the on-time delivery performed poorest and is dragging down that metric? What do I need to fix in my supply chain, right? Those are all things that Genie Deep Research Mode is intended to do. It's not available yet today, but it should be available in the next couple of weeks in a preview. So please do contact your Databricks account team to get you enabled for that once it's available. Again, just a couple weeks away. Last query that I want to go through for the sake of continuity is that example query that we looked at in the dashboards for mimicking that scenario of future demand, right? So I have the same exact query that I populated in the dashboard data set last time, trying to compare our available quantity that we currently have in stock against that increase in demand. So again, the exact same query. We have a parameter here for the percentage increase that we're simulating through sales. I'm now adding this as a, what does this question answer? I forgot to answer that. And this question answers, do we have enough parts to support an X% sales increase? Sales change, whatever that might be, right? So now I have that example, just for the sake of practicality, I'm gonna ask this. So do we have enough parts for a 5% increase in sales? Right, so I asked that question. Genie's going to find a trusted example query that we have. So it then populates the exact same table output that we saw before. You still have that option in the user interface directly here through what we offer in Databricks to simulate this example. I want to switch this from 5 to 25. You can see what parts we have that are considered insufficient or sufficient stock. I want to switch this to maybe 25%. Apply, rerun the query. It now shows me the ones that we need additional parts for. Doesn't really highlight it super clearly there, but there was one part, I think this one, that changed between the increased quantity needed and changed from sufficient to insufficient stock. I can now look at this output here, again, keeping the context within the thread of my conversation to say, how many parts have insufficient stock. So just a part count of that list. So just kind of an aggregation on top of that outcome that we just saw. Good question in the recording about the recording. Yes, it will be available. It's not automatically emailed to you, unfortunately, but in the chat, I will post my email address. You can reach out to myself, or if you have a Databricks account team you correspond with, please do reach out to them. I can share it with them as well. I'll provide it in Google. How is Genie different from Snowflake AI agents? Great question. Fundamentally, they perform in a very similar fashion, right? If I go back to this diagram, the process by which Genie answers questions is very similar to what Snowflake Intelligence offers, Redshift, Amazon Q offer. The differentiators for what we offer here at Databricks are a more unified experience where you have a unified governance layer. Genie can automatically read the data sets that are provided in Unity Catalog. You have a centralized governance and cataloging mechanism available to you, so it speeds up that developer process. The way by which we inject context in Databricks in a flexible fashion through queries, natural language, all in an interface is different. Others use a YAML file or a custom metadata layer that they provide as an abstraction on top of the data. So there's a layer of it which goes into, I'll call it the experience by which you're providing one of these solutions. That's a big differentiator on top of it. The other one is just how the actual algorithms are designed and developed. I've mentioned this a few times. I'll allude to it now. And I'll be candid, our product teams were a little bit apprehensive to display this, even though we knew we were a leader in the category, because this benchmark alone doesn't say Databricks is the best at every single task, right? It's just we do the best on the benchmarks. We do a great job out of the box on any data set without applying every bit of context at answering that, right? So the Bird benchmark does a good job on the single model leaderboard of showing that Databricks has the base knowledge in our compound AI system out of the box. We can get you from your raw data to a base level of question answering better than any other system out there on the market today, right? So those are some ways by which we differentiate between them. A couple of quick things that I can also highlight from here. I saw a question a minute ago about Databricks 1. Let me bring up the interface real quick, jam that into the last 4 minutes. This is an example of what Databricks 1 looks like, and Genie is absolutely a part of it. Think about Databricks 1 as the interface you would use for somebody who's a read-only or a consumer user. They don't need to have access to notebooks, to the SQL editor. They don't need access to compute or anything like that. All they need to do is consume the assets that are built for them. So if that's the case for your organization, you can use this consumer entitlement that will provide them today. It'll look similar to what you see here today, except just have dashboards, Genie, and apps. So it kind of restricts that nav bar, but it's still not overly business friendly or easy to interface with. That's what Databricks 1 is. So now I go into my marketing campaign, Genie space. I can ask the question directly from this interface. How many campaigns have we run in the last year? Asks the question, reverts me to the Genie space. The warehouse that I had attached here is not started, but it's running that question back from what the end user asked, right? So Databricks 1 is kind of the new interface for those consumer users, and what we recommend adding for virtually any one of those different scenarios. So that's Databricks 1. Reminder again that you can consume Databricks via many different mechanisms. It can be through the UI. If you want to give users access to the UI in Databricks, it's great because they have the UI. You have, as a developer, the access to tune all of the things that make your space better. I forgot to talk about benchmarks. Let's jam that in here too. As a developer, you can also monitor the chat history. You can monitor the questions with feedback that users have provided. So if I go into a chat as an end user, I can provide feedback. Was this correct? Does it need fixing? Can I get an expert to review the question? All those things show up back in here. So again, as a developer, it helps out with the maintenance and the ongoing monitoring of your space to make sure things are proceeding in a good fashion. I know I forgot something. It was benchmarks, one of the most important things. So sorry to jam this in at the last minute, but let's talk about benchmarks. A benchmark you'll see in the 3 dots on the right-hand side. So the benchmarks allow me to ask questions that I can then evaluate against my Genie space. So I have a completed space that I'm going to jump to for the sake of time here with some of these already done. So let's jump into benchmarks. So I have a series of questions. What are my most frequently sourced parts? What's the OTD for Asian-based suppliers? How many suppliers do we have? What's our total revenue for 2025 models? I've provided what we're considering as the ground truth, the query that generates the correct answer. Once you provide these example queries, you do this by adding the question of what does this SQL query answer? Add that as a benchmark query, and then run the benchmark. This then tests as if a user were asking the same question to Genie, did we get it correct? And you'll see here, as the questions are iterated and asked on, you'll see an indicator like green check mark. Genie got the answer correct. The result matches the query that you provided. If it's yellow, it means we need to have somebody review this. We're not entirely sure if the result is the same. And one thing I want to highlight about this as well is you can see there's like small nuances in how the query is written. If you do a string search, character by character, the queries might not be exactly the same, but the result is the same. That's what's most important, right? If the result is the same filters are getting applied, regardless of the syntax of the query, that's all that matters, right? Again, accuracy should be the most important metric by which you evaluate your space. That's what benchmarks allow you to do. So you can see it's gotten all these questions correct. So that means that I've applied the right amount of context to get my space from raw data to end users asking those questions. And under evaluations, you can see the history of when you've run those evaluations. Um, and all this will be stored, tracked, logged, monitored, audited, etc. So talked a lot, Jen, that in. Appreciate all the questions and engagement throughout. I can stick around in case there's any others that come up as we go. I saw the question there at the end about Data Zone. I'll admit I am not overly familiar with Amazon Data Zone, but would recommend either reaching out to myself. I can do some more digging with our product teams, or reach out to your Databricks team to get some more details on that. But hopefully this is a good example of kind of going from raw space to kind of more complete finished data product. Highlighted Databricks 1. I didn't really highlight the Databricks API or app interface, but hopefully you can imagine if you have other applications that your teams are leveraging today, you could build those in. I have an example that kind of simulates some of this from a Databricks hosted web app. I have a bunch of these different suppliers that I want to evaluate where my data comes from. I want to evaluate my sales forecast by vehicle program. So what's actually happening is these are just like pre-canned and populated examples, kind of like what you have in a Genie space. If I go back into the space, you see these example questions in here of like, how many vehicles are expected to be sold every month based on our forecast. These are example questions that I've just put into a web app. So it's pinging Genie just on the back end using the API, right? I can click one of these different questions. It'll retrieve back the data, and I've built a custom visualization on top of it in this dashboard here to tell me, which parts do we have sufficient stock for based on the increase in forecast, right? So this is an example of just how you can leverage Genie. I could apply a chat interface or a chat box on this screen, of course, as well. But that covers, I think, pretty much everything to do with getting the space itself ready to go. Again, happy to help if you have follow-up questions over email. I will make this recording available as a YouTube link. So if you have interest in getting those, again, my email is in the chat, as well as Julia's. You can reach out to us for that. Awesome. Well, thanks again for all the engagement questions, and glad to see many of you joined all 3 weeks. So we'll end it here. Have a great day.